Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. I'm Danette Fenton-Menzies and we're in season 2 of this podcast. And in this season, we're talking about 2 elements from my accepts model, problem solving and also collaboration. And today I'm going to be talking with Emma Gibbons, and we'll find out a little bit more about Emma shortly. But I'd love to welcome Jez into the conversation. Jez FM, welcome.
Thank you, Danette. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Jez FM, the son of Danette and also the podcast producer here. Former comedy writer. I mean, I do some comedy writing still, but I just formally have also done it. And I've done stand-up comedy before and some podcast producing. And the Adapt with Danette FM podcast is a really important podcast because the times are changing. You need to adapt. And this is the toolkit to go with it. It's the companion to The Adaptable Leader by Danette FM. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a book that's got a lot of adaptability skills. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed or stressed out by the changing landscape of the world, this is a great book and toolkit for you to use. So, Danette, how are you going this week?
Yeah, Jez had a great week. Lots of interesting things happening and just work-wise and also just personal. And this weekend I'm going to a ball, which I haven't been to a ball for ages, so I'm super excited about that too.
That's awesome, Danette. Well, speaking of balls, I finished up my season doing commentary for basketball. So that was its own ball-related activity, and our team, 2 of the youth teams, made the semi-finals for the Coburg Giants, if people want to follow that team there. So that was exciting, but they both lost, unfortunately, in the semi-finals. But that's all right. Next season we'll adapt more and hopefully win the final, I think. Love it. So today we're talking to Emma Gibbons, who I have worked with before, but did you want to tell us a little bit about how you met Emma as well?
So Emma belongs to a group that I'm in called Thought Leaders, and we actually connected in person last year at a retreat, and it was a restorative yoga retreat, and we had so much fun that Emma has come and visited at the farm, stayed for a weekend, which was awesome. And she runs a company with her partner Reese called Acknowledge This. So she is from America. She's a white woman and she is working with Reese, who is an Indigenous man, to help organisations talk about and do the acknowledgement to country in a way that resonates for their organisations. They do some extraordinary work. They also have their own podcast, which I believe, Jez, you've helped them with as well. So would you like to share a little bit about that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with Reese and Emma, they're both really fun, but also take their sort of craft very seriously. Yes. But it is, any conversation you have with them is always going to be engaging, fun. They're always open to laughs, and actually hanging out with the 2 of them, you are guaranteed to have a great time. There's no other way to say it. And Emma has a background in politics from the US or back in the Obama thing, and then has brought that over here, which you'll hear about a little bit shortly. But yeah, no, I've worked with Emma and Reese on their podcast, the Acknowledge This podcast, which I recommend people go check out on YouTube. Totally. It's a really fun YouTube podcast, and they do have a lot of fun. And also just how they talk about acknowledgement of country. A lot of people just read it off a script, but for them, they actually tell you how to sort of bring a personal element to it. And I have, just through editing the podcast, has changed my opinion about it and how to really bring my own energy to it, which I've loved. So I highly recommend checking that one out. But before we get into properly talking about Emma Mum, I think it's time for us to adapt the news. Alrighty, this is our Adapt the News segment, and what we do here is we take a news story that's current at the time of recording, this will be last week for you listening right now, and we sort of break it down through adaptability. So what does this mean for adaptability and what have you? So this was an interesting one. So we're kind of getting towards the end of the Olympics here, heading into the Paralympics in Paris, and I thought there was a very interesting statistic, which is that if you look at the list of countries that are most represented at the 2024 Olympics, by most athletes, it goes the United States, number 1, which makes sense. Number 2 is France, and number 3 is Australia. Now, this was interesting to me because obviously we have a much smaller population than both France and the USA, and certainly other countries that are below us, China, India, what have you. So, Danette, I was wondering, did you have any insights about sort of sports in Australia and why it is that we're so overrepresented at the Olympics?
So I love that particular statistic, Jez, because while we are, in terms of landmass, quite a large country, we are quite a small population for that size. And I think part of being an Australian, and it doesn't matter what culture you come from, part of being Australian is the whole we have to adapt because our climate is weird. We have some extremes in climate here. And I think that sports is part of our culture. So I live on a farm, and I know that the local towns around us on Saturday afternoons are often deserted because the entire town is following different sports codes, and they're either playing or they're cheering or they're volunteering for those particular sports things. And I think part of that, what makes us great athletes too, is sometimes, depending on where the person has grown up, they've had to adapt how they train to get to that world-class level. I saw a video the other day of someone and they were swimming up a canal, and that was their sort of starting career as a swimmer. And I was like, there'd be kids who are in dams swimming. There'd be people running up roads and there's brown snakes coming across the road as they're running. So I think that it is part of our culture, whether you like whether you're a player or not. I think that people just go, let's get behind these people who've got to that elite level. I know that the government has invested in our athletes as well because they see that it is something really important. And I think it's just part of our give it a go, let's give it a whirl and try different things. And then people, some sports people are good at a number of sports and then they'll focus on maybe one or two. And I think as part of our culture, we invest in that and, really support, whether it's the Olympics, the Paralympics, the high-level world games and that sort of stuff. We just love being part of that as Australians, and we definitely punch above our weight.
Well, I mean, I think a couple of those things are right. So I think, just to give people an idea that are listening from outside of Australia, Australia's population is approximately 26 million people.
Yes.
To kind of put that in context, Canada has 38 million and California has 39 million. And Australia is roughly the size of, America, land mass wise. We're pretty similar. So that to give you an idea of the population spread out is a lot of spread out areas, and so I think that there's a lot of outside, so a lot of people playing outside. I definitely think a huge deal is the government investing in it because, I think there's a lot of other countries that have a lot of sparse land, but without the resources, people aren't going to really succeed. I think a great example, however, of the inverse of that is the country South Sudan this year in the Olympics. They won their first ever Olympics basketball game and they don't have a single indoor court in their whole country.
Wow,
so
good on them.
They're really amazing. And they almost beat the US. They lost by 2 points. So it's a really, for them, a hugely successful Olympics, and we have to celebrate that as well. But I think another thing that's been really big for Australia, sort of slightly under the radar, but also, in some areas quite important, is that a lot of our golds have been won by women. And I think that actually is important because I think it speaks to Australia's broader sporting context in that we want everybody to be successful at sports, and that includes our women. But I think maybe our women are involved in sports for a little bit longer than they might be in other cultures. That may be some element of it, where it's with more of a government investment in the youth league sports, that gives them more of an opportunity to actually sort of play it more professionally. But there is one interesting example that I think really sums this up in some ways, and I think it's a good example of both countries. So my partner's from India, Kanika. She works at Magical Learning, does social medias, newsletter, does everything. And we were in India. Yeah, it is awesome. And we were in India in December, and for them, they had big banners everywhere for people that had achieved a GCSE score of 99. They would have a big banner with the person's photo and everything, and everybody that achieved in the 90s would be smaller images underneath them. And this was to celebrate these kids. Congratulations, great effort on their high schooling. And when I think of Australia, I think you'd be more likely to see that for someone who is representing Australia in a certain, in rugby
true.
or something. You're more likely to see that.
Yes.
So I think it's also culturally how we set up the country, where we celebrate sporting achievements probably more than academic achievements in this country.
Yes, that's so true, Jez. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, neither had I until I was there, and I was like, oh, we don't have these. We probably have something else.
Yep. love it.
Awesome. Well, Danette, that's been our Adapt the News segment. But I guess before we dive into your awesome chat with Emma, our mutual friend, did you have anything you kind of wanted to share?
Yeah, I loved Emma's journey from a very confident young person, going through political campaign for Barack Obama and learning that she needed to seek other opinions, not just hold her own. And so I love that humility that she's learnt through that process to become someone who actually creates beautiful spaces for people to collaborate well. And I won't say any more than that. We'll just use that as a teaser, I think, for everyone to listen.
There's nothing else to say. I think let's dive into today's conversation between Danette and Emma Gibbons.
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Adapt with Danette FM. Today I've got a wonderful guest, Emma Gibbons, who I'll get to introduce herself in a second. This season we are looking at collaboration and problem solving, and today we're going to deep dive into collaboration. Now, Emma, welcome to this podcast. Emma has been on our Magical Learning podcast, and we will share a link to that with the descriptions to this particular podcast. So, Emma, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves to our listeners and viewers who might be meeting you for the first time.
Oh, thank you, Danette. I'll start my story back in 2008 when I started volunteering for the Barack Obama campaign in my hometown of in Duluth, northern Minnesota. And since then, I sort of got I caught the addiction of working in political campaigns. And that work brought me all across the United States. I worked throughout university, working then internationally throughout North America and the Caribbean. And then eventually that work brought me to Australia. So working on political campaigns, as you can imagine, it's different for every context, every kind of race, every different country with the different regulations, codes, and procedures of how elections work. But of course, also the different community and cultural elements. So throughout those different campaigns and those different communities, I've really had to focus on collaboration, bringing people together around a common cause. And so I'm very excited to share some of that, those street smarts, I guess I've learned from the years of traipsing around the world, bringing people together to work on a common project.
Oh, I love that. Oh, we're going to have some great discussion. So let's start with question number one, which is, what have you seen or experienced that's helped you with collaboration?
A lot of the work when it comes to collaboration and having a good collaboration across many different stakeholders, and particularly people with really different opinions or strong opinions. It's interesting. There's a lot of answers to this question, but the one that's coming to me right now is going within myself. To knowing myself and how I am oriented within the space. And it's not an ego or attachment to my own idea being best. I think that's the thing I've had to unlearn. Actually, I remember early on that very first campaign in Barack Obama days, I was a young 17-year-old with a really strong opinion about how something should be done. And I went head to head with one of the field organizers, battling it out of which process we were going to do for creating these door knocking packs. And went head to head with him, made my case. I eventually won. I won out, which was great at the time. I felt my young victory. Yes. But it was in about hour 8 of doing the process that I had proposed, which was a more laborious process, that I realized, maybe my own perspective wasn't quite the most efficient or the best suited for this task. And that really early lesson of humbling myself, I guess, or having that humility to recognize that I don't have all the best answers was a really useful moment. And when I continue to learn and relearn. But I think when starting within myself and holding a lot more looseness around my own opinions about what should be done helps me to gather the best bits from everyone else in the room as well.
Oh, I love that answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, of course. I'm like, we're just jamming, right? So I think there's, of course, as I imagine, Danette, with you as well, a lot of our work has both the internal and then the external environment. And the external consideration when it comes to collaboration is to and this is just honed through years of facilitation practice, but what is the thing that is actually in the way of collaboration? And often it's not related to the project or the task at hand. It's either emotional, or it's political, or it's history. There's often something that's in the way that is not explicit. And the quicker that you can name and identify that thing and make it explicit, either adding it to that shared pool of learning or addressing it in a way so everyone feels comfortable to walk around it throughout the rest of the collaboration, that's probably the most the useful thing that I try to dial into whenever starting a big collaboration or project.
Love that. Oh, the internal and the external. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm really curious about, would you mind sharing an example of poor collaboration, and particularly what were the impacts? So you don't have to name organisations or anything, but more just really interested on what a poor version of collaboration looks like and the impacts it has.
Well, besides my own poor collaboration example I just shared. So I was, y'all remember COVID, right? That COVID pandemic thing we had. I was very fortunate to serve in the state government, in the communications team during that period, particularly in launching the vaccination campaign. And there were degrees of brilliant collaboration and degrees of really poor collaboration. And when it was poor collaboration, it was often, again, it was people holding on to a strong attachment to their patch and what was theirs and what was yours, and holding really rigid boundaries that actually got in the way of looking across the ecosystem. Where are the best opportunities? Who is best served to deliver those opportunities? Where are the resources? Some of those really important and more like systemic or higher level questions that got undermined because people had a patch and a procedure, and they wanted to operate within really strict boundaries and weren't open to change and to adapting or adjusting how things were. And again, like, that's a really extreme example because COVID was a wild time, right?
Yes.
So I don't blame anyone for battening down the hatches and going and like being like, nope, this is how we've always done it. This is what we got to do. Like, I get it. I totally understand. But it was a really good learning experience of when, and on the flip side, the good collaboration times was when we sat down and we said, okay, let's pretend we've never done this before, because we haven't really.
Yeah.
How would we redo this? What system would we put in place? What kind of communications or procedures, or can we get around this agreement or this situation? So I think, yeah, that openness and willing to let go of that rigidity, those strict boundaries, and this is my patch. That's where I think that's sort of the opposite of collaboration in some ways. Hey, that hardness.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that because if people notice that they're really sort of digging into their viewpoint, there's a sign that perhaps I need to loosen up a bit, be a bit more open to what everyone else is talking about. Yeah. And it can be hard to recognize when you're in those moments, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And everyone's trying their best. There's often such good intention, and people are just trying to do it the way they think it should be done best. And that's beautiful and really admirable. And we need a lot of that leadership at various times and for different projects. But yeah, how do you balance that with the equal, opening and lessening the grasp on those things?
Yeah, nice. All right, well, let's go to the next one, which is, based on your experience, what tips do you have for others? And Jez added this bit about including young people who might be just starting out around developing your collaboration skills. So how can anyone, wherever they start developing their collaboration skills?
The first part of collaboration is creating a good space, right? A good space where people feel safe and open to share, where they feel fully accepted in whatever they share. And what I love about the true tenets of inclusion is that they work for everyone from any background, from any ism or experience. So in targeting young people, sure, in targeting people from different cultural backgrounds or people with different disabilities or mental disabilities that get in the way. I have ADHD, so I'm very aware of how I need to operate in spaces, yes. As an example. By creating those conditions for a good, safe space, you really enable everyone being able to participate. And creating that good space doesn't start by saying, this is a safe space, everyone. Often if you verbally acknowledgement, you create this moment where people put their hackles up and like they're like, wait, was it not a safe space? You've named it, so now was it something different? And even then, often those who say it then don't facilitate in that way. It's almost like a cop out or a cheat code to then not having to act safely, and that is of course incongruent with what you're trying to do. When it comes to creating a safe space, my key tip that I use is lead with my own vulnerability.
Nice.
So I lead with openness and vulnerability, and I find that people meet me in that space that I create.
Yeah.
So whatever depth of vulnerability or openness I want to facilitate, I lead in that way. So in my work with Acknowledge This, how to give an authentic acknowledgement of country, I very quickly in my intro name, hey, I'm a white fella and a migrant, and I'm trying to talk about this cultural practice in Australia. And then you just kind of name it and you open it up and you say, I'm okay talking about it, and people will meet you there and open up to a similar level. So that's both, I think, what we're trying to create and how it can help everyone, but also how I specifically do it.
Lovely. I love that. And what would be some things that you wouldn't do to create a safe space? What creates an unsafe space? Some other examples?
Well, yeah, I mean, judgment is the primary one, and judgment comes in a lot of different forms. It could be judgment about, like, if you're talking about Netflix and you judge what someone's watching, like that immediately creates a moment where like, oh, was what I was watching weird or awkward? Do you judge me now? It's also, I think, in tone and body language. We kind of all know the basics of, sitting back with your arms crossed gives a front or a visual cue that you're not worthwhile, or they're not interested in what you're saying. One other piece I would just add is that when it comes to facilitating collaborative spaces, it is your role as the facilitator to bring everyone in and to call people out, right? And so if you do see judgment happening between other individuals in the collaboration, it's up to you as a facilitator to name that. And I want to use the word police almost, but not quite that strong.
Yeah.
But making sure that you are the one who is threading the tone, pulling people up or pushing people back, again, because the dynamics are always going to be changing for every different conversation that you host. And so I would encourage you to assert your power and your role in that, in helping ensure that those tenets of good space are maintained across the group.
I love that. And again, this isn't in the questions, but I'm just thinking in terms of your experience, what sort of environments help people open up versus ones that will tend to shut people down? So even, how you set up a room or whether you're inside or outside, what are some of the things you can do that make collaboration a little bit more open, or you inadvertently do and close it down a bit?
Yeah. Well, something about collaboration takes a lot more time. That's why people don't do it. It takes a lot more resourcing, both in your energy and time spent. So particularly if I'm leading a really difficult collaboration experience with really diverse perspectives, the mechanism I'll use is I'll do a one-on-one walk and talk with all the players in advance.
Nice.
So that allows me to build a relationship with them, often in an outdoor environment where people are more relaxed. And the walk and talk is nice because if I'm trying to figure out what that big elephant is that we haven't named, I can ask the pointier questions and people can do the activity of walking, without needing to jump in or have an answer. And it's a non-confrontational way to explore together. So putting in that time to get to know each of my stakeholders in each of their own positions helps me go into that collaboration with more knowledge, but also more relationship across all of the individuals. They know who I am as well. So I love the walk and talk. When it comes to like actual collaboration, often our environments are boardrooms, right? Or sitting around a table. As much as I can, I try to create a shared power environment. So how can we be evenly spaced around the table? Or, if I'm on stage, I often won't be on stage. I'll walk around, So those are some of the factors I consider. The other ones that I would just add is kind of the stuff I would think is known, but having a space which is quiet, you're able to focus. Like I wouldn't bring a big collaboration meeting to a busy cafe because there's just a lot of distraction. You can only get so far down. There's a shallowness that would happen there. So kind of stuff that's known just from social human interaction 101.
Nice. Love that. And some great tips there for people. So So I'd love to hear your favorite example of collaboration and why it's your favorite example of collaboration.
Oh, my favorite example. So my all-time favorite campaign was working on the marriage equality campaign as state director in 2017.
Nice.
And that was just again, I feel like I showed up for the touchdown. I hadn't worked on that issue for a long time. I wasn't gay myself, identifying at the time and things. So I feel very honored to have been able to lead and step up and help my brothers and sisters in that way. But the thing I loved about that collaboration was that because the issue of gay marriage was so universal, everyone knows someone who's gay. It was sort of like politically agnostic.
Yep.
So I had the liberals, I had Labor, I had the Greens, I had the libertarians, I had all these different political parties wanting to get involved and invested in their own way. And even to the point where, like, I remember we had two volunteers. One was a staunch liberal who hated unions, and the other was literally a union organizer. But through volunteering on this campaign together, they got to know each other and certainly have a bit of banter back and forth about their ideology, but they formed a friendship working alongside each other. Yeah, and it's just and that's just the political spectrum. Of course, we also had corporate participating, not-for-profits, lots of other participants, but that coming together across the political divide was really powerful. And that was something that was missing from the most recent referendum campaign here in Australia, and what a missed opportunity to
Totally.
Yeah, Australia has a really strong tenet of collectivism compared to other jurisdictions I've worked in. And I love that Australians seem to be able to rise above the politics and come together when it matters. Yeah. And that was a really great example on the marriage equality campaign, seeing that in practice.
Oh, great example. Love that. All right. My next question, and we're sort of coming towards the end, but is there anything else you'd like to share, including any helpful resources that might help our listeners and our viewers?
Well, when it comes to collaboration, I believe that the greatest tool we can use is conversations, right? Having conversations, facilitating those conversations, because in those conversations is where we get to learn from each other. We get to understand each other's different perspectives. And that feedback is precious, right? It's more data. It helps us to identify different patterns, different possibilities, identify different where energy is moving or where it's a bit stuck. And so it's just the conversations are infinitely valuable when it comes to collaborating. And I actually wrote a book called The Anatomy of Conversation. So the Anatomy of Conversation gives you the theory, the 5-step anatomy that I put forward, opening, ask, listen, respond, and closing conversations. It's a little pocket guide, a little field guide to take with you and to pass around. But that's a resource I would definitely recommend. And then I have a heap of other resources. I love Crucial Conversations as a book, a classic tome in this space. The other one is, if you're having trouble making the case for collaboration, like how do I get the budget or the business case for why we need to invest the time and resourcing into a collaborative process. I love like The Wisdom of the Crowd as a book or a resource, and it kind of points out how when you ask a lot of people, you find the best way forward. It just comes out through that process, which is a great community engagement sort of text as well. Yeah, those are just the initial ones that are popping off my brain, but of course there's heaps of good ones out there.
And we'll make sure we include links to all of those in the description for the podcast. So, Emma, is there anything else you'd like to share around collaboration?
It is harder. It takes more energy. It takes more time, but it is so worthwhile. It's rewarding within yourself and the accomplishment of really connecting with others and bringing people together around a common cause and achieving something together. It's just not quite the same as completing a project on your own or as fast as possible. And so it's very, very much worthwhile from that personal satisfaction perspective, but also every time I have reached out and asked for help or built a collaborative process, the outcomes are better. It's better for everyone. It's more sustainable. It lasts longer. And I think in our world today, which is so hustle bustle, driving for the now, I got to hit the KPI before the end of the year and the budget, blah, blah, blah. Like, let's just pause and actually remember best practice. And best practice for some things takes time.
Yeah, I love that. Totally love that. So Emma, thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I'm sure that there will be viewers and listeners who would love to reach out and connect with you. So where are the best places that they can reach out to you?
The best first stop is my website, emmagibbons.com, Gibbens. Otherwise, LinkedIn, Instagram. If you give me a Google, I have a TED Talk out there too. You might enjoy. So yeah, happy to connect and have a conversation about anything you're curious about.
I love that. Well, Emma, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And as usual, I'm going to give you a big hug.
Yeah, Danette hugs.
And until next time, stay adaptable, everyone. Wow, Jez, wasn't that a great conversation? I just love chatting to Emma. So some of the things that I took away from that is that humility to, so we've got to sort of park our ego and hold our opinions loosely in order to be able to bring all of the different perspectives into the room. So I really, really enjoyed that. The other thing, when she talked about poor collaboration, we saw the opposite of that, where people basically dig themselves in. It's about protecting their thoughts, their opinions, their turf. That's not true collaboration. So noticing if we are, as a leader, doing that, because that's actually going to interfere with the collaboration. And one of the things, and I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to read this, and this comes from Emma's book, The Anatomy of Conversation, which we highly recommend. It's a great way of helping to set up really good collaboration. And she has I did 4 fingers there, has a 5-step model in her book. And those steps are opening, ask, listen, responding, and then the closing conversations. And so the other thing I really liked is her intentional way of setting up rooms to make sure that all voices are heard rather than the normal voices that we would hear. So I just found this a gem of how to do it really practically, to use some really good frameworks such as Emma's 5-step process in order to make this something that actually allows all voices to be heard. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, I mean, so many good insights there. And I think there's something I have to say, sort of, when I was doing the podcast with Emma and Reese, one thing that was interesting was that Emma and Reese, they sent me some sort of recordings that they'd just done of just their sort of sitting down to acknowledge this just beforehand to get me an insight into how they sort of run conversations. And it's really interesting how they run conversations because they're very open, but they also create these certain boundaries so that people don't accidentally close off the space. So what that's about is it's about, say someone might have something that could be maybe a view that's not going to align with other people for whatever reason. Their job in the conversation isn't just to allow that to go out. It's to sort of it's to see that come out, maybe talk about it a little bit and why that may shut down other people's things. Because at the end of the day, you don't want, if you're entering a conversation, you don't want it just to be your opinion and then you walk away feeling good. It's, it's a dialogue. So you and you may be totally blind to things that you don't know, and you don't know that this is hindering how other people are viewing the topic. So what they do is they're very good at facilitating. So, hey, this may sort of be not working for this. Do other people want to maybe talk about this? But the idea is that it is a safe space, because even ideas that may sort of hinder other ones, they sort of open it up to the team so that everybody can actually examine that idea properly, and then they can kind of move on with everybody still included. So yes,
love that.
It certainly that is a takeaway that I had from a while ago, and a lot of what Emma is talking about, Emma definitely does practice. One of the big things that Emma said, which I had never thought about, but it's a good idea, and this was a big takeaway for me, even though it was a very subtle point, was that she said it's always good to be in a non-distracting environment. Like a cafe or something can be distracting.
Yes.
And if you want to actually have a real conversation, really set the room where it's just the conversation, because I know myself, I'm easily distracted, and so that's going to hinder that conversation. But even that sort of level of conversation really works. And then the other thing that I thought was good was meeting the people you'll be collaborating with prior to collaboration.
Yes, that was
it's
genius.
a really important point. We hear it all the time. We actually talked to Anne on a Magical Learning podcast that I think will be coming out next week if people want to check Yes, if you want to check that one out. And it was talking about sort of the importance of collaboration and how that can be built before the collaboration, how important that stuff is. So, yeah, they're my takeaways.
Nice. What a great conversation. Now, Jez, have we got a viewer or a listener that's got a question for us this week?
Yes, we have one of those two. I'm not too sure which one it is, but we want to thank Camilla for writing in. They didn't specify if they're a listener or a viewer, but regardless, thank you so much for sending one in. So, Camilla, here we go. So this is from Camilla. Hey, Danette, one problem I've had my entire career that I don't like public speaking. I'm currently studying a master's in political science and it is going well. However, I'm very nervous for any speaking assessment or speaking in public in general. Do you have any tips that make public speaking a bit easier, or how can I at least look a little more confident? Camilla.
I love this question, Camilla. So there's a fabulous TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, which talks about confidence. So when we're public speaking, the looser we are with our body, meaning the more relaxed we are with our body, that helps us be more confident. What you often see with people who are very nervous is they might get on their phone before they have to speak to people. Now, the problem with getting on your phone is you're going to hunch over. That says to your body that you're likely to be going into a threatening situation. You actually want to be relaxed. So I think moving around a little bit, see what I'm doing if you're watching, I'm basically shrugging my shoulders, etc. That can be really important. One of the things I've found of many years of public speaking is the more I make what I'm talking about to be of service to others, the more that stops me thinking about myself. So I think we get really nervous when we focus on ourselves. I always go, I want to share this information because it's going to help these people in this way. So I think that also comes back to, you're learning a topic, political science, congrats on doing that. And so think about how can this help the people that are listening, and focus more on what you're delivering to them rather than how you show up. I think also just a couple of things to help you remember that this is a skill like any other skill. And so as we try it once, think about what's one thing I could do to improve my public speaking for next time. So it could be as simple as just smiling at the audience, looking at them occasionally, looking for friendly faces. The big thing you'll see with professional versus just starting is when we're just starting, we tend to not know what to do with our hands. We move a lot because we're a bit nervous. What you'll notice as you get better is you'll be more centered. So a bit of deep breathing beforehand can help you become centered, and then you're more deliberate. So for those that are watching, they will see that I'm moving my hands at the moment. So you can be more deliberate in your actions rather than getting that nervous energy coming out. So if beforehand you are feeling nervous, which is perfectly normal, move a little bit before you go on stage or in front of your peers, because that will get that energy out so you can be a bit more calm. And in the last podcast, I talked about Carol Dweck's growth versus fixed mindset. One of Carol Dweck's great phrases that I love is, I'm not good at this yet, or I haven't quite mastered this yet. And knowing that every time you try public speaking and then you learn from it, you get a little bit better. So just go for little 1% growth each time you stand up and speak. It is a wonderful way to influence not just one person, but many people. So it gives you more impact longer term. Great question.
Thank you, Camilla. And I wanted to say, I've done stand-up comedy and stuff like that, so that's obviously a bit of public speaking. And just my quick 2 cents on this one is that one tip that I did hear about was, this is someone that used to MC nights. Their tip was go and try and meet as much of the audience as possible, because what it does is it makes them familiar with you, so they want you to do well. Yes. So that's and if you're going to be speaking to a room, that's really easy. You can be like, oh, hey, I'm speaking later, or you can walk up to people and be like, oh, what do you do? And while you're networking, mention that you're going to be speaking later. It already creates a better sense of friendship amongst the people you're talking to, so you're feeling less nervous, if that's possible. It's not always possible. I think the other thing as well is that it's about accepting that no speech is ever going to go 100% right. So you have to be okay. So there's going to be moments that are going to go slightly wrong. That's okay. The more you can try and sit with those and expect them and then go, oh, whoops, I missed that. People like that moment of openness where you go, where you sort of can show, hey, I'm a human being and not a robot. That allows them to connect to you, and then you can kind of go from there. And you'll actually probably even feel bolstered because the audience might laugh or something. They're joining in with you, and then hopefully, what really happens with all this stuff is the more confident you can get, the more confident you'll seem, and it just is a snowballing effect. That's fantastic, and that starts with being open and trying to create a good experience. Exactly what you're talking about there, Danette. Yes. So, Danette, did you have any final thoughts today on using conversations for political change, like what Emma was talking about, or just today's conversation in general?
Yep. So I really loved the conversation with Emma, and making great conversation is actually an art, which is why I really love Emma's book. So when we go into something like collaboration and we're ill-prepared because we haven't seen it as an art, we've just seen it as an event, I think we actually take away from what could be possible in those conversations. So I highly recommend Emma's book, and I think just thinking how you set up collaboration to succeed before you get in the room, how you set up the room, and how we make it safe for everyone to be in the room. We touch on the difficult things, but also make sure that they don't then create threats in the room. So there was what I would say mastery in how to collaborate in the conversation with Emma today. So it was fabulous. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you've said, but then I also wanted to just add, I think with this concept of safe spaces, people tend to think that it's safe for people that are just easily offended, maybe. But what it actually is more is creating a safe space for people who have opinions that maybe some may find offensive, and sort of, I guess, bringing that into the conversation and talking about, why is this way? Why is this happening? And how can we better navigate this sort of going forward so that everybody can actually be at more peace and more relaxed because they know where the boundaries are. So it's just much easier to be more open. We do have to mention, I think, Danette, that this is a companion. If you like this podcast, you're going to love this book, The Adaptable Leader by Danette. As I've mentioned in other podcasts, the world's getting more sort of chaotic. It's changing so quickly. So being adaptable is really probably the number one skill you need. If you want sort of a break in case of emergency toolkit, The Acceptable Leader by Danette FM with its accepts model, so there's just easy things to remember, that is available right now. So you can go check that out, and you can keep listening to this podcast as well.
All right. Well, thank you for another great conversation, Jez. And for all of our listeners and our viewers, stay adaptable.